So on page 50, he makes a great point about writing. Essentially, he says that writers today, bloggers, etc., really should be really thankful of a free market. So if you look at writing in history, of course, writers could not make a living whatsoever unless they appealed to a king, which was usually the case. And basically, up to even to the 19th century, it was fairly rare for someone to make any money that they could live on as a writer. And for example, Herbert Spencer, I think, was the very first philosopher who made money who could make money only by his writing. I think he was the first philosopher because of all the philosophers, of course, previous to him were academics usually in university. So of course, teaching was their livelihood, not their writing. So anyways, so I'll quote here on page 50. So he says, writing was a liberal art, a hobby, but not a profession. It was a noble pursuit of wealthy people, of kings, grandees, and statesmen, of patricians and other gentlemen of independent means. So that's how it used to be. It was something that you could do in your old age as a writer. It's not something that young people did ever, not because they wouldn't be wise enough to really write anything worthwhile, but because there's no way that they could afford it. And then just further down, he says that at least it was possible for an author whom one or several courts had banned to find refuge with a rival court. So I thought that was interesting in terms of like in the past, if you were a writer, you wrote for a king, but you could be banned if you pissed off that royal family member in their court. But at least then, kind of like Voltaire, at least then you could run and leave France every now and then, as he had to, and seek out a rival court and write for them. And similar how that is today, that if you don't have to worry so much about like you have a huge audience. Your audience isn't just one business or one group. Well, funny enough, though, a lot of people think that writers and media are essentially controlled by corporations and or politicians and bribery and things like that. And of course, there's nothing historically inaccurate about that because that actually used to be how it was. You'd be a writer for a court. And while there may be a little bit of leeway to write what you want, as Voltaire did, and as Voltaire had to leave every now and then because he pissed somebody off, and in many ways, whoever pays the piper calls the tune, right? So the money does alter the message. And I think recently the New York Times was purchased by someone who kind of was starting to alter the message a little bit, the New York Times, and make certain things more favorable that they had originally been criticizing, which is interesting. But of course, that's fairly pervasive and historically accurate that you'd have writers who were essentially bought and paid for. And the media, especially with the Trump fancy going on right now, I think a lot of people think the media is bought and paid for and does have a certain message based on their backers. And there's no doubt that the historical, the lineage, the legacy maybe of writing, that's fully in place. That writers are going to be their message is going to be altered by who's supporting them, and we can see that, of course, with all kinds of activist groups who are obviously biased in what they're writing, and it's very difficult to find writers then who can provide a cool view, even in the universities. It's very difficult because they often have a political agenda. But again, this idea of writing. So the main point here is that writing used to be a luxury, used to be engaged with only by the rich or who the rich paid. But nowadays, because of the free market, and again, a lot of bloggers and writers probably don't agree with this or don't think this is true, but this is true. A lot of those writers are because of being able to do what they do. Like anyone who writes for a magazine or a newspaper, these people are living off the wealth of and the productivity and the free market, the free, somewhat free, I guess you could say, the somewhat free market we have today. They are living off the immense amount of wealth that civilization has in order to engage in that profession at all. Because in the past, they wouldn't have been able to do that. They would have had to be farmers or something like that. So the anti-capitalist mentality you can find in writers. Ironically, they could not be doing what they do without capitalism.